Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's 1:15. We're going to get started with the Finance Committee. So I'd like to call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. David, are there any public speakers?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, there are 5 public speakers today. The first speaker is Charlton D'Souza, who will be followed by Jason Anthony.
Good afternoon, Charlton D'Souza from Passengers United. I'm the president. So what I want to talk to you guys about at the Finance Committee meeting is the whole rail discount package. And as I said in the Long Island Railroad Committee meeting this morning, is that 20% going to Penn Station, it should really be 50%. But I do know that there's some hardships during rush hours for the Long Island Railroad. But I did hear some concerns at the meeting this morning about some things that were raised by board members. So I do want to point out some positives. So since Atlantic Ticket came out on the Hempstead branch, the Hempstead branch actually has the best performance in the Long Island Railroad system. So does the Long Beach branch. So I don't even think, and the trains have been very crowded, but it's not affecting the Long Island Railroad ridership. It's not affecting the delays. It's not causing any problems. So we don't want to put city commuters versus suburban commuters. That's not the right thing to do. But if I was an elected official in office and I was in the New York State Assembly, you know what I would have done? I would have said, let's give Long Island Railroad commuters who live in Suffolk and Nassau, give them a discount. So I think what you guys might want to do is maybe have an overall discount for people going to Atlantic Terminal. So if you're coming from Suffolk, if you're coming from Nassau County, maybe Atlantic Terminal should be in Zone 3 and call it a day, so those people are getting a discount and that works for them. And then with the Penn Station construction during the evening, yes, I can understand that being a hardship. However, like I said before, overnight you have empty trains running at 1:42 in the morning. Those trains are empty. I know, I work overnight. No one's riding them. Why can you give us a discount? But again, you guys want to focus on Uber, so I would like to meet with you, Mario, personally, with my Passengers United
Please
team.
conclude your remarks,
And
Mr.
we can talk
D'Souza.
with you.
Thank you.
All right? If you can have someone give me your information, we'll be in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jason Anthony, who will be followed by Andrew Pollock.
Good afternoon, Larry Schwartz. Good afternoon, Bob Ferran, Anthony McCord, and Mario Pellegrin. Let's talk about transformation and discounts, shall we? We know that Anthony McCord is the unofficial Chief Transformation Officer. But providing transformation has to come with some benefits to the commuters that ride mass transit like my own self. Discounts that right now are only given to those who ride the Atlantic branch like my own self that has my home station, Atlantic Terminal, Brooklyn, Flatbush Avenue. Last week, I took the Long Island Railroad 3 times to and from Atlantic Terminal. It saved myself 40 minutes on each way. And I don't want to be mean with Neil that his constituents pay the most with no discounts whatsoever. We should give them a fair share of that discount. I don't want to be selfish, but we have to be fair. Providing discounts to those in the city could be beneficial, but those who live in Montauk, Southeast, and Passaic, etc., should have the benefit of those discounts. So, Bob Ferran, it's up to you to make that decision, and I hope that you do it wisely. So I'll see you guys on Wednesday.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Andrew Pollock, who will be followed by Rachel Foss.
Good afternoon, Bob, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. 2 things regarding buses today. I forgot to mention last month that the Q27 is also going to be impacted by the Queens bus redesign. And also, I want to state on the record that the QM5 and QM7 express buses in Fresh Meadows are going to be impacted, and I'm potentially going to lose my express bus stop in Fresh Meadows at 188th Street and 73rd Avenue. So let's make sure that's on the record. Okay, second, we're having problems at Queens Village Bus Depot lately with the Orion 7 second-gen buses. This is the miles from 6844 to 6852 and from 6854 to 6905. So let's go to a timeline of events, shall we? This is 2 weeks ago. Let's go back to, and if I have my calendar, see, this is the problem with these phones. Okay, let's just go back 2 weeks ago. This was 2 Tuesdays ago. I was on the 150 bus from Long Island Jewish to Kew Gardens. Orion 7 old gen. Back door wasn't opening. Then, on Thursday, I take the 138 bus, and bus is going so slow. Apparently, the transmission's having a problem. So, this is where I call Governor Cuomo on it. He promised us more buses at Queens Village Bus Depot. Currently, right now, we have the brand new 2019 fleet, which is the Smart Bus. There's 64 buses right now. And the second gens, we have 61 buses. So what I'm suggesting to the governor is, especially because this is part of the capital budget, there's supposed to be a plan for the next 3 years to slowly phase out these buses. So I hope the governor can keep to his word. He has 3 years, and I hope he'll deliver on it. So thank you very much. I'll see you all in March.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Rachel Foss, followed by Lisa Daglian.
Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Foss, the Senior Research Analyst at reInvent Albany. We advocate for more transparent and accountable state government, including for state authorities like the MTA. This week, the MTA board is being asked to approve another slate of projects funded by the Outer Borough Transit Fund, a $50 million annual pot funded from the for-hire vehicle fee created in 2018. The legislature and governor have determined these projects so far in secret outside of the regular budget process without the opportunity for public comment. We understand that the MTA has no role in determining the scope of these projects, but given that there are no other public venues in which to discuss them, we would like to ask the MTA board and staff to play a role in providing greater transparency of these funds and their process for approval. All Outer Borough Transit Fund projects by law are subject to a unanimous vote by 3 members of the Capital Program Review Board as appointed by the Governor, Senate, and Assembly. Yet the CPRB has still not met publicly and is subject to the Open Meetings Law per an opinion from the Committee on Open Government. Further, a list of these projects has still not been made available to the public as requested by reInvent Albany and 17 other groups in August 2019. Based on the projects announced so far, we are concerned that these items are non-strategic, and some, such as the bridge toll rebates, are counter to the stated goals of reducing transit deserts through expanded mass transit. Riders may be facing another fare hike next year. At the same time, the legislature and MTA are undertaking non-strategic financial decisions, such as the Outer Borough Fund projects and the hiring of new police officers. Given a climate of increasingly scarce operating funds, it is important that decisions regarding spending public funds are made strategically and publicly. We ask the MTA board and staff to help shed a light on the full scope of projects by releasing the full list of Outer Borough Fund projects and explaining to the public exactly what the process will be for their finalization. The public deserves to understand how $50 million of public funds are being spent so it can weigh in with its elected officials regarding the programs. This is in your interest as well, so that the MTA can potentially influence future projects that are determined through the Outer Borough Transit Fund to ensure that they best serve riders. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Lisa Daglian.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Lisa Dagley, and I'm the Executive Director of the Permanent Citizens Advisory Committee to the MTA, or PCAC. This may sound somewhat familiar to those of you who were in the committee meeting this morning. Today you'll be voting on an Outer Borough rail discount pilot that could start as soon as May 1st and run 6 to 12 months, costing up to $20 million combined. Riders traveling to, from, and between stations in New York City on Metro North and the Long Island Railroad will receive varying discounted fares paid for from Phase 1 of congestion pricing funds. We appreciate that local elected leaders obtain these benefits for their constituents and hope more people will get out of their cars and onto transit. We do have some concerns that this could bring people over the border to take advantage of those discounts. We also hope that any increases in ridership will result in increase in service, especially as Eastside Access, Penn Access, and the Empire Complex come online. Ideally, The analysis that will include financial ridership or operational and train capacity impacts, along with ticket sales and train count discounts, would have happened before implementation of this program, so that there could be a window into anticipated effects on riders, especially those who come from further away and pay hundreds of dollars a month to travel into the city. That's precisely why the Transit Riders Council undertook a capacity analysis in advance of its Atlantic ticket proposal, which offers a discount on travel to and from Atlantic Terminal and subway deserts in Southeast Queens, including Brooklyn stations in between. The Outer Borough pilot program applies to every station, even those adjacent to subways, like Woodside. Does not take into account those trains which may have little or no capacity, nor does it apply evenly to the Long Island Railroad and Metro North, offering a 20% discount on monthly tickets to the railroad, but not Metro North. We support an equitable fare structure and look forward to looking at the data that's gathered from this pilot and working together toward that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes the public speaking session.
All right, now I'd like to have an approval of the January 21st minutes. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
So
Do I have a
moved.
second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Right, minutes are approved. David, can you take us through the work plan?
Mr. Chairman, there are no changes to the work plan, and the next item on the agenda is Budget Watch, which is both as handout and in the exhibit book. Budget Watch focuses on January preliminary operating results and subsidy cash results through February, which are measured against the adopted budget. Passenger revenues for January were favorable by $6.8 million, or 1.3%. Subway was $5.7 million favorable, pardon me, and combined bus for New York City Transit MTA bus was $2.3 million unfavorable. New York City Transit bus ridership was higher than budgeted, but lower than budgeted average fare resulted in unfavorable fare box revenue, while MTA bus, both ridership and average fare were below budget. The commuter railroads are both above budget, with Long Island Railroad favorable by $2.2 million and Metro North favorable by $1.2 million, both higher due to higher non-commutation ridership. Toll revenue for January was $3.5 million, or 2.3% favorable, reflecting lower average toll yields, as well as higher traffic, which is due to unseasonably mild weather in January. Mild temperatures and low precipitation, particularly below normal snowfall, had a favorable impact not just on traffic but on ridership as well. Preliminary expenses for January were $7.8 million, or 0.7% favorable. In addition to vacancy-related savings at B&T and the Long Island Railroad, the favorable expense variance mostly reflected the timing of expenses. Preliminary expenses also reflect overtime, which was $10.3 million, or 13.3% favorable. However, as with expenses in general, timing accounted significantly to the favorable variance, with $7 million at New York City Transit. About 70% of the total favorable variance was timing related. Fewer than budgeted weather events also favorably contributed to the favorable overtime variance. Programmatic information for January is provided in an overtime details section immediately following the flash portion of Budget Watch. Debt service costs were $5.7 million, or 2.4% unfavorable, primarily due to timing, which was partially offset by lower than budgeted interest rates. Moving to subsidies. Total subsidies were $15.8 million, or 4.1% favorable for February, and were $35.9 million, or 5.9% favorable year-to-date through February. Year-to-date, the mortgage recording tax was $19.8 million, or 26% favorable. The urban tax was $12.4 million, or 11.6% favorable, and the payroll mobility tax was $5.9 million, or 2.5% favorable. The petroleum business tax and the for-hire vehicle surcharge was very slightly unfavorable, while the first MTA aid and MMTO receipts are not scheduled to be received until March and May respectively. Overall, preliminary results for January for operations and through February for subsidies were favorable by $48 million. Total expenses after adjusting for timing-related impacts were on target, while revenues from fares, tolls, and subsidies were $46 million favorable. And that concludes Budget Watch if there are any questions.
Let me just ask, that's a lot of very good news in that report. Let me ask in terms of the overtime, which we've spent a lot of time looking at. On page 2, you talk about overtime the top of page 2 for New York City Transit, MTA Bus, Long Island Railroad, M&R, and B&T. But in the specific breakout that you have later on, you include all of those, and then you include headquarters. And I noticed that headquarters is $500,000 worse than budgeted. And I just think it is important, given that that is where I believe the MTA police overtime is found, and given that there's some very aggressive assumptions on MTA police in terms of savings in overtime, I think over $12 million over the next year. I think it will be it's necessary to highlight what is going on there, specifically at among MTA police overtime, and the impact of the new hires on overtime, and the impact on projections. So I would just suggest that rather than sort of losing the MTA police on page 6 in the breakout, I think it should be included in the overtime numbers, and there probably needs to be month-by-month discussion, since we are assuming very substantial savings.
I agree with you. We will add MTA headquarters to the overtime as well as the expense. Pardon me. Through the years, it's evolved. Budget Watch typically had been an operating agency report, but we'll add MTA headquarters to it. Also, there will be more extensive overtime reporting, either coming next month or the month after. They've been working on it through the subcommittees of the overtime task force. Sure. If there are no other questions, the next item is Finance Watch. It can be found in Section 5, page 24, and Patrick McCoy is here to take us through it.
Good afternoon. We just have 2 transactions to report. The first was a competitive sale of a floating rate note, the Series 2012 G-3 bonds. These are transportation revenue bonds, was held on February 3rd. The winning bid was submitted by RBC Capital Markets with SIFMA plus 43 basis points. And the all-in true interest costs based on the first reset was 1.591%. This will obviously float with SIFMA being reset on a weekly basis. Next, we have a 2.8 million gallon ULSD fuel hedge that was competitively bid on January 30th. Merrill Lynch Commodities won this at an all-in price of $1.71 per gallon, and this hedge covers a period January 21 through December of 21. Happy to take any questions. Okay, thank you.
Next, we move on to MTHQ and all agency items. There are 8 action items this month. Patrick McCoy will take us through the first 3 items.
So the first thing we have is the ratification of the TBTA special obligation resolution authorizing sales tax revenue obligations. This is a bond credit that will pledge both the state and the city portion of the new sales tax. And as you can see here on the purpose, I'll read this because this is what you're approving. This ratifies the previously approved annexed resolution and supplemental resolutions to provide for the issuance of TBTA sales tax revenue obligations to finance Central Business District tolling program operating and maintenance expenses and capital needs, and approved capital program transit and commuter projects contained in the 20 to 24 and subsequent capital programs. This was approved by the Capital Program Review Board and is coming back to the board for final ratification. Our next steps with respect to this bond credit will be to get it rated, to issue an RFP for trustee services, and we would anticipate our first issuance of these sales tax bonds sometime this summer. I'm happy to take any questions on this. And if I could, just one quick correction in the staff summary under discussion and background item 1A. You see $125 million for state fiscal year 19 to 20. I apologize, that's a typo. It should say $112.5 million. Okay. So no questions. The next item is a supplemental bond resolution seeking authority to issue $1 billion in bonds secured by these sales tax bonds under this new credit, obviously once we get the trustee and the credit rated. And that's the additional resolution there. And then there's a reimbursement resolution which provides for reimbursement with tax-exempt bond proceeds of any expenses that were paid with revenues, and that's necessary to comply with prevailing tax law. So the three resolutions are one package, and we're seeking approval on that.
Questions from any board members? None. I'll make a motion to approve. Do I have a second? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
The fourth action item is to secure MTA board approval to file for and accept federal grants for federal fiscal year 2020. Stephanie Delisle and Catherine Corliss are here if you have any questions.
Any questions from a board member? Motion to approve. Do I have a second? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
Next is the 2019 TBTA operating surplus, which seeks approval of resolutions which will certify and transfer $779,075,275 of its operating surplus to the MTA and New York City Transit, transfer $3,688,754, representing 2019 investment income to the MTA, and advance the 2020 TBTA surplus.
Questions? Motion to approve. Do I have a second? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
The next item is the mortgage recording tax escalation payments to Dutchess, Orange, and Rockland counties. It is recommended that the board authorize escalator payments totaling $5,313,296.16 to Dutchess, Orange, and Rockland counties from available funds on deposit in the MRT2 corporate transportation account.
Questions? I make a motion to approve. Do I have a second? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
The next action item is to obtain the board's adoption and approval of the attached resolution establishing the MTA Major Construction Review Unit, MCRU, and an initial MCRU panel of internal and external experts.
Questions? I make a motion to approve. Do I have a second? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
The last item is requesting approval to conduct the New York City Outerborough Rail Discount Pilot. During the pilot, the MTA will lower the cost of travel within New York City for customers of both Long Island Railroad and Metro North Railroad on certain eligible ticket types. Mark Young and Mike Schiffer are here to take any questions.
Questions? I make a motion to approve then. Whoops. Okay, Commissioner Alpert?
Thank you, Chairman Schwartz. So, a bunch of questions come to mind. Are you prepared to monitor this in a way that shows where there has been a diversion from the normal travel options to the new travel options? What is going to happen to the station Far Rockaway? Is that going to be part of this trial, or will it not? I mean, just are you going to monitor where people have decided to cross borders to obtain the new discounts? I mean, a host of questions come to mind, obviously.
Yes, so many of those issues, we've been deliberating about over the last few weeks and months or so. I guess I'll address a few of them, your questions. So Far Rockaway, the issue of Far Rockaway being in the city, but on a branch that goes through Nassau County has been an issue that has come up multiple times in different, Atlantic Ticket is an example of that. We've been asked, to be consistent with the prior, with our current policy, Far Rockaway would not be part of this program. We have been asked to look into ways we can potentially address that issue for Far Rockaway residents. I think President Eng mentioned that this morning. So we are looking at that in advance of the rollout of the pilot. As far as the other issues you raised, many potential impacts of this program, financial, operational potentially, if there's crowding, capacity issues. So as well as changes in customer behavior to potentially take advantage of a significantly discounted ticket. So that's all part of our analysis. We've have some initial estimates of what we think might happen, but as I said at the Railroad Committee, very preliminary. This is the first time we've embarked on a ticket like this, so that's the point of the pilot, to assess. I'll turn it over to Mike Schiffer from Metro North.
And we'll be monitoring our heaviest load, actually all of our trains that make stops in the Bronx to see if their loads change significantly as well. It's determining the diversions is a little tougher, but you get a better sense of that when you see how those load changes behave specifically.
Yeah, in the Bronx, the Harlem line would be adjacent to subways, so that's where you would likely see a diversion. But on the Long Island, it's so many different places where there's subways and the railroad at the same place, so that would be a little tougher. But
and it really depends. I think, for example, if somebody's making a choice between whether they keep a Metro card in their pocket, which they pay for and get a lot of origins and destinations out of, versus a commuter rail ticket, which has a specific destination, I think people will make that judgment call on their own. But we'll get a rough idea of that, and actually a very accurate idea as we count the trains.
and my last question would be, I'm sure you're going to pay particular attention to the outbound trips, because that is where you have the possibility of people paying hundreds of dollars for a commutation ticket having to stand for people that did not.
Yes, that's on our radar. And one thing I would add to what Mike said, one valuable aspect of the analysis of Atlantic Ticket was through MTA, we conducted a customer survey of decision-making on the part of the customers who took advantage of Atlantic Ticket. Were they brand-new customers? Were they switchers from transit, subway? Did they just switch from Penn to Atlantic? So we've been speaking to MTA headquarters about a similar approach for a survey this time.
Commissioner Zuckerman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Kevin Law pointed out to me this morning, this is effectively a mandate from the legislature upon an agreement with the governor, and I would certainly not stand in the way of our leaders in their desire to properly and thoughtfully share the benefits of congestion pricing. And I'm sure in that survey, if you asked if people would like a discount, I'm pretty confident 100% would say, yes, I'd like to pay less for a service. So that's always good, because everyone likes to get something for less than someone else. And yet, we are on this board, in many cases, representative of geographies. I myself represent Putnam County, New York, which is just under 100,000 residents who are paying upwards of $6,000 a year for their commutation ticket, $1,500 a year to park, and then another 40% of them paying for a monthly Metro card. We are paying too much. We are paying more than we can possibly tolerate anymore. And I will tell you that having a conversation about discounting for additional ridership on the same trains that my colleagues, my commuters, my neighbors ride is becoming deeply unfair. I've shared this same line of reasoning with each of you at this board and those of your predecessors for years when it comes to the capital plan, when it comes to fare increases, but those who pay the most should not get the least. And I repeat this same line of commentary that I did at the Metro North and Long Island Railroad committees, because there are various members of this committee who are not there this morning, to include staff, who will need to hear me say this, because it is unfair. And I have said many times that in 2020 I have two goals. Two things I'm working on. One is ensuring the implementation of positive train control, and I want to thank Kathy and Phil and Debbie Chin and others of management for making what was a very unsettling and unclear path finally get to realization. And Larry, I want to thank you personally for all your support since I brought it up to you when you first joined the board. But the second thing I will be focusing on this year, which I will continue to pound the table in public sessions and one-on-one with each of you, so look forward to those enjoyable conversations, about a flat fare for those who ride Long Island Railroad and Metro North. When I say a flat fare, I mean aspirationally a single fare, because those in my community are paying thousands and thousands of dollars to the point where it is uneconomic anymore. I look forward to your support. I look forward to your tolerance of my advocacy for this point, and I look forward to your sanity in terms of supporting a much more reasonable approach for the way we charge our riders. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Lynn, you get to go after Commissioner Zuckerman.
As you, I think, can hear, we had a rather energetic conversation this morning on this subject, and let me just, to be brief, since much was said, and I assume that what was said this morning will be sort of incorporated by reference in the thinking about the Outer Bridgeboro Rail Discount Program. I think it is critical that we set up baseline analysis of what's happening now and the impact of the program. And I said this morning, if we have assumptions based on what's going to happen to ridership, we need to set forth what we think will happen, and then we need to see after the pilot what in fact did happen. If we think that there's going to be shifts from one type of use to another, let's predict and then have the analysis that demonstrates it. I think I easily see us 6 months from now sort of looking back without having the appropriate baseline to say what it was initially and then where we came. And I think there was an understanding that we would do that analysis. There was, I understand, a projection of about $16 million cost in the Long Island Railroad, about a $5 million cost in Metro North. I'd like to understand the backup for that, and then when the results come in, I'd like to see how it compares to what we initially projected.
Commissioner Brown.
Yeah, it seems to me like that this legislation is, I think that the reaction of Mr. Zuckerman and Mr. Lynn is very mild compared to what is probably said in the seats at a commuter rail service further out in Suffolk and outlying points to the north. I suggest that the commuters are much stronger in their opinion than the polite way that Neil states the case. Well, we had a fare structure before that existed in kind of a free-floating equilibrium of acquiescence. Everybody thought somebody else is getting a better deal, but still, we're still riding the train. So people are riding the train. Everybody, he said, if you give everybody a choice, do I want lower fares or someone else get lower fare? Everybody wants that. Well, by the legislature, by picking out a single constituency in our admittedly value-laden fare structure, what they've done is basically turned over the table. And the pressure has to come in Albany on the politicians to support the entirety of the service to a greater degree, or each of our little constituencies will just pick each other apart. And it's really not a lot different than board governance, because you see the city people now, each borough wants a rep on the board because it's not fair, they don't have a rep on the board. So, but every time you add a rep from a particular area, you in essence dilute the vote of everybody else that already is there. And it's the same way with the fare structure. You take one piece of it and you give a value to those people. You've in essence taken something away from everyone else, and in relative terms. And that's where we're at with it. It wasn't our choice, but I suggest that given the operating budget problems that are facing the entirety of the system going forward, that this, I won't say it's the wrong time, but it did happen. We have to deal with it. Now you have also mainline third track and east side access coming online in the next 2 years. When that occurs, the fare box operating ratio of the Long Island Railroad is going to go completely in the toilet. I suggest, as an amateur with these numbers, Bob, you will know much more precisely what's going to happen to the fare box recovery ratio of that service then. Well, then the rest of the territory is going to want to know, what about me? When do I get mine? Well, these are value judgments, and I suggest we as a board should be taking positions on these things rather than just let the politicians in Albany pick us apart. Clearly, the Queen's politicians in this circumstance exerted all their leverage and got something for their people. Well, in essence, that takes away from everybody else. Now, back to the numbers, though. I didn't have a long time to go over the numbers, but it seemed to me your calculations regarding sort of demand curves in this seem to be saying that correct me if I'm wrong, but you're assuming basically a 10% increase in ridership in these areas as a function of the 10%. You're not? It's not a 45-degree?
I'll speak for Long Island Railroad first. Mike can chime in and again, I want to stress, as I said before, this is a brand new program. We have assumptions in our financial projections, but we have to see how it plays out. For the Long Island Railroad, the figure that Commissioner Lynn referenced assumes the assumption for that calculation was no new ridership into the system the value of all existing customers having a discount, losing that revenue, and then it factored in a certain amount of lost revenue from individuals traveling to city stations to get a cheaper price when they currently may embark in Nassau.
When you say 16 million, I think that was the number. When you say 16 million a year, you're saying that's 16 million, so that's 10%. That number represents 10% of what would have been, you're now making 160 million a year off that.
Well, they're all, I wouldn't just a blanket percent, because the monthly tickets are discounted at 20%.
Right.
Yeah. So what we did in the analysis, which we have all ticket types, how many people purchase every type of ticket from where they're coming from, and then we calculated the lost revenue depending on the ticket type and the number of customers who buy that type of ticket.
And similarly, at Metro North, we have an elasticity of demand model that looks at the markets, looks at the various sub-markets, looks at the various ticket types and the trip pairs. And then from that, you make an assumption. It's not an exact science, but it gives you kind of an educated informational point to go from. And so with that, the assumption is approximately 2,450 daily trips. That's rough, right? And that includes both trips that are diverted from the subway. It includes new transit riders. It also includes behavioral change where people may start their trip outside of the city limits, but then continue their trip within at the discount. And that's not illegal. It's something, but it requires some changes in the way people behave in terms of their trip patterns. So again, this gives a very rough idea though, but again, that's the whole point of the pilot, is to really look and see how behavior will change on the part of a variety of different submarkets.
But the 16 million figure is strictly a mathematical calculation on existing ridership, and you have a little tweak there with how many people are going to cross the border to find a place to park near the station. Good luck with that in Queens.
That's correct. We've used current ridership, ticket type, destination, and calculated the fare loss with some additional assumptions about how many people would cross from Zone 4 to Zone 3, essentially.
All right. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Commissioner Zuckerman, last year I said that I was going to create a working group to look at and explore other ways of coming up with revenue to offset having to raise fares on our, not just commuters, but all users of the system. And I'm going to put that together for March, and so we can talk about different ways and different opportunities. We didn't really have a chance the last time around. I tried to come up with some creative ways with off-peak tickets and everything like that, but unfortunately, I legally couldn't put those ideas forward unless we delayed the fare increase. And Bob's hair was turning gray and red and brown and green. So, but we should get an early start, because I also just believe not just in looking at our fare structures and how we do that, but I just think we need to find other revenue sources. I don't know why, with the booming tourism industry that we have here, they use our system, that whether it's a surcharge on an Airbnb room or something, that money could be dedicated to offsetting or freezing fares for New York City transit riders as well as commuter rail riders. So we should be inventive and creative and innovative in trying to figure out if there's other ways to approach this issue instead of just having to have biannual fare increases on autopilot.
I am at your disposal, sir.
Okay, great. Okay, I am, since we've asked all our questions on this issue, I am going to make a motion. Do I have a second? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We have one opposed, Commissioner Zuckerman. Anyone else opposed? Okay. Motion carried. Okay. David, can we keep going, please?
Sure. Next we move to MTHQ and all agency items, reports and information items. The Ferivation reports begin on page 76. Pat Warren has a short presentation, and we also have Susan Doring from Metro North, Mark Young from Long Island Railroad, and Aaron Stern and Judy McLean from New York City Transit, if there are any questions.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'll give you an update on the effects of our efforts to curb fare evasion. Specifically, I'm going to go over the effects with regard to Transit's fare evasion deterrence efforts. As you can recall, the metric that we use to measure the effectiveness of our efforts to deter at deterrence is the fare evasion rate. On this slide, you will see that the rates for the last 2 quarters of 2019. You'll recall that we initiated enhanced efforts to deter fare evasion in the 3rd quarter of 2019. These efforts included increased policing, use of an improved estimation methodology, and a public messaging campaign. From these statistics, we cautiously note that our efforts have stemmed the increase in fare evasion, which is not insignificant at this time. And it's also not surprising that it takes a bit of time to achieve change in both behavior and our ability to quantify these changes. So it's moving in the right direction. We continue to adjust our policing, messaging, and estimation methodology to achieve greater success. Oop, what's going on here? Can you go back to that? Let me see. There we go. Thank you. With regard to the methodology used in fare evasion, in estimating fare evasion, there's a keen interest to get to a place where we are quite confident that our analysis, with our analysis, so that we can have confidence in the amount of fiscal losses the MTA and its customers are suffering, and then use these loss figures to guide the level of effort we apply to the problem. To this end, the MTA, with support from the Inspector General and Professor Chan from the Columbia University, over the last several months, we have further improved our estimation methodologies. This team has coalesced on a solution they were excited to put in action this April. This chart illustrates that we will begin to use our new methodology to collect and analyze information in the 2nd quarter of 2020. And we should get our first comparable results at the end of the 3rd quarter of this year. And unless there are any questions, that concludes my comments.
Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, you were kind enough to have me at one of the meetings with the Columbia expert, and I was struck. They didn't do any evaluation on fare evasion on buses, which seems to be our hemorrhage point. Is this methodology going to capture the problem in buses?
So there's smart people in the room than me that I may call them up in a second. But bottom line is, yes, they are. It is being worked for buses also. It's a similar methodology. The question is just stratification of how we exactly do the counting on the buses. And so that's the last piece that's going into place right now.
But, I'm always disconcerted when we start talking about new efforts to ramp up efforts on fare evasion, which seem constantly to turn to the subways when our hemorrhage point is buses. So you don't have to answer that. That's my...
It's not being ignored at all. No, you're exactly right. Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioner Lynn.
So I think that's encouraging that we have a new methodology that we're applying. I'm wondering how we then, with the understanding that the new methodology doesn't come in till Q2 or Q3, how do we analyze that the savings we're projecting in our financial plan are or not achieved? Since I think we're assuming about $50 million of savings in fare evasion for this current calendar year.
Commissioner Lynn, I'll just give you my layperson observation. As I've communicated with Pat Warren, I don't have any confidence in the fare evasion numbers that have been provided to this board for over a year now. When we had a briefing on fare evasion in December of 2018, we were told the fare evasion problem was about $180 million. Somewhere in the neighborhood of between 4 and 6 months later, we were told the fare evasion problem was closer to $300 million. My issue, and with the help of the Inspector General's office, we realized that both the methodology and the method in which observing and determining fare evasion was flawed. So until these new procedures and new methodology is put in place, which I have confidence in Dr. Chan's work, and I have confidence in the work of the IG and others that have put a lot of time and effort in coming up with new procedures on how to monitor and assess fare evasion. Until this is in place starting in the second quarter, and I know that pencils are down now, so we can begin the methodology. I'm not going to opine on what we need to do or not do until we have actual numbers that we have confidence in that mirror reality, whether they're issues dealing with the buses or issues dealing with the subways or both. I don't see how you can put together an effective enforcement plan when you really don't know if you have a little problem, a medium problem, or a big problem. I would say to you, Pat, that getting the analysis, the answers to the analysis from the second quarter by the end of the third quarter is way too long. I don't know what it takes to do the analysis, but I'd like the analysis like a week after the second quarter ends for this committee and for the full board, so that within a half of the year of the calendar year, we can really understand what's going on here. And to then Commissioner Lynn's question, are we going to be on budget because we cut it by $50 million, or we're not going to be on budget? We're going to be a lot better than budget, worse than budget. We can then have a serious conversation because we have confidence in what the numbers are. So to try to answer your thing, I just have no confidence because the numbers have been bouncing all over the place. So, who's on first? All right.
So I agree with that, and I think also to formulate what the program should look like necessitates the actual numbers of what we were losing and how.
Pat, could you just remind me I'm not trying to put you out too much, but can you just remind me the brief outlines of what our new methodology is? Again, it's fine if you don't have grave detail, but number of observations, locations. I don't recall, and it's given that that's an important part of what you're sharing is a new methodology. I'd like to know just generally what is that? And I'm sure you've shared in many private briefings, but I'd like just the outline, please.
So the sort of the base of this, besides the math has also changed a bit, but the counting part, the estimate, the survey part of it, is now largely focused on a stratification process. So in other words, it's tied to where the most service is happening. So we will count at those locations more often than we would at other locations. That's sort of the base understanding of it.
Pat, I also just think you're going to have more checkers. The checkers are going to be positioned in more strategic locations than they have been previously. I just want to make sure that there's more to this than even you're kind of suggesting. Captain, are you okay? Alpert?
I have to go along with Chairman Schwartz. I think the numbers are not telling you the real picture. I ride an awful lot, and I cannot remember a ride where I did not see people beating the fare. And I'm talking subways, not buses now. I think the unattended entrances that we have, 472 stations, there's probably over 1,000 unattended entrances easily. They are a real vulnerability. The other day I saw a man with 20 children wait for someone to go out through the slam gate, and then they all went in together. I mean, just multiply this by the approximate number of times, and I think we have a real problem. And that's going to end up hurting service for the folks that most urgently need the service. So, if you have plainclothes people, I hope, looking at these places, don't just look at attended entrances. You've got to look at unattended, out-of-the-way entrances. People know where to go to get in free.
Violent agreement, all that's happening.
Any other? I don't. Do you guys want to go through? Do we need to? Is there anything else on fare evasion for this? Okay,
Not unless anybody has any other questions.
great. I think
Okay.
we've beat that horse to death.
Okay. David Ross is here to lead the committee through procurements for headquarters and the agencies.
Thank you, David. MTA headquarters has one procurement action for $2,381,294. It extends a competitively awarded contract with Cambridge Systematics for 2 years. Cambridge will continue to provide hosting, maintenance, and improvements to the central server subsystem of the bus customer information system.
Questions by any board member? I make a motion to approve. Do I have a second? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
Okay, there are no items for Metro North. Long Island Railroad is proposing a non-competitive 2-year contract for $85 million with Mitsubishi Electric Power Products on behalf of itself and Metro North. The contract covers original equipment manufacturers' spare parts for M7, M8, and M9 electric cars.
Any questions from any commissioners? I'm going to make a motion to approve. Does my friend from Long Island, was going to second it? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried.
New York City Transit has 9 competitive actions totaling $1,376,054,976. The first action proposed is Design Build Award with MTA Construction and Development to Sitnalta TAP a joint venture totaling $53.9 million for accessibility upgrades at the Livonia Avenue station on the Canarsie line. In connection with this action, approval is sought for a stipend totaling $88,000 for the unsuccessful proposer.
All right, David, let me stop you there. Because of the nature of these, the whole litany of procurements and what was done at New York City Transit, I'm going to ask that we take each one up one at a time, okay?
Okay.
Is that okay with the rest of the committee? So do I have I'll make a motion to approve. Do I have a second on the first item? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? First one, motion carried. Go to the second one now.
Very good. The second action is a $5,961,327 modification to extend a contract with CH2M Hill, New York, for 1 year. CH2M Hill will provide consultant services and pre-award support for the upcoming A-Division subway car procurement to replace existing R62 and R62A cars.
Any questions by a commissioner? I'll make a motion to approve. Do I have a second? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
So the next 2 actions are ratifications totaling $3,429,000. The first is a $2.2 million modification to a contract with LK Comstock and Company for the installation of a new 3,000 kVA rectifier and transformer at the 78th Street substation on the Queens Boulevard line. This work was urgently required following the loss of power to several substations along the Queens Boulevard line in July.
Do the next one.
The second modifies a contract with Masterpiece US, adding $1,229,000 for hardening communications room MR 436 at the 148th Street station on the 3 line. And the fifth action requests...
No, stop
Oh, you
there.
want to stop there? Okay.
Yep. Any questions by any commissioner on those 2 items? I make a motion to approve. Do I have a second? All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried.
But we're still with ratifications. The fifth action requests authorization to use a competitive request for proposal process to purchase 504 A-Division Rapid Transit open gangway cars with an option to purchase 445 additional cars and a second option to purchase up to 415 additional cars.
So at New York City Transit earlier today, we voted this action item without recommendation to the full board. Part of the reason why there was a number of people missing from the New York City Transit Committee, and some members, some other board may have questions. I'm fully in support of this. I've been fully briefed. This is something I have a long history with, but in the interest of consistency and in partnership with New York City Transit, first, if any commissioner has any questions regarding this action item, if not, I'll just make a motion that we report this without recommendation to the full board for Wednesday's meeting. Do we have a second? All those in favor? Opposed?
The last four actions are being added as walk-ins. They are for competitive contracts to multiple vendors totaling $1,312,764,649 for accessoride paratransit primary carrier transportation services.
So again, we had a discussion at New York City Transit. This was a late action item. I appreciate everything that the paratransit group has done to try to answer questions that I've had, Sarah Feinberg's had, and other commissioners had. But this came to us at our board briefings last week. And I'm just going to reiterate what I said this morning, substituting for Sarah at New York City Transit. In this day and age, there is no reason whatsoever why the MTA can't have a system where every single one of your contracts, you know its expiration date. And you know that based on the expiration date of each single contract, whether it's an RFP or some other competitive process, when you need to re-engage and start a new process to renew a contract, or if there's an option to renew, or you have to rebid the whole thing. As chairman of Finance Committee, I will not accept anything coming to this committee without at least 1 month's advance notice. Board members deserve the right and need the opportunity not only to understand many of these complicated procurements, but they need their own ability to do their due diligence and to ask questions and to be satisfied on what those answers are, and not at things that, I understand shit happens, but shit should happen like almost never. It happens all too often, too frequently, and that has to end. And it's going to end now because I just don't think it's fair, and it puts us on the board in a tough position in that we want to do the right thing. We want to keep things moving. We want to keep making progress and improve performance. On the other hand, we don't want to feel rushed in the decisions we make. So I know Commissioner Jones wants to ask a question, and I'll just kind of try to move this forward without recommendation to the full board, and we'll take it up then.
I would strongly support. I have been concerned for the last 3.5 years I've been on the board of not having adequate briefing or even getting paper in advance of meetings. But this is also a materiality issue. We're looking at the public and we're talking about $1 billion. That's material. It's one thing, 1.5 million, but now you're talking real money. And to literally have a briefing where I wasn't allowed to have paper, I guess I'd be willing to sign a non-disclosure, whatever you need. But this feels really weird to have this problem now 3.5 years later, that this has been a sort of constant problem of board members across the board not feeling they're adequately briefed on really material investments. Thank you. I join Commissioner Schwartz in this.
Okay. So I'm going to make a motion to approve without recommendation that we can take up at the full board meeting on Wednesday. Do I have a second? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion carried.
Pardon me. MTA consolidated financial and operational reports for January are on pages 100 through 153, and David Florio will now lead us to the real estate portion of the agenda.
We have 3 action items. The first is with Metro North. It's a license of vacant land to support an adjacent businesses parking for customers and employees. The second involves Long Island Railroad and MTA Construction and Design. It's an amendment of an agreement that facilitates the construction of improvements on Level A at Penn Station. And the last is a license agreement with Transit Wireless to provide for our customers cellular and data reception in the Canarsie Tunnel. Happy to answer any questions about action items or information items.
Is it your expectation that, pending approval, Transit Wireless would complete this while the L-train tunnel work is still going on and be finished by April, or it would go on beyond that?
Yes. Yes.
That's a great answer, Jano. Thank you.
I had a brain freeze. Do I have to make a motion to approve something? All right, I'm
Reaction
making a
items.
motion to approve. Do I have a second? All those in favor? Opposed? Approved.
Mr. Chairman, that concludes all the items on today's agenda.
Great. I need a motion. I'm making the motion to adjourn the Finance Committee. Second? All those in favor? Motion adjourned. Thank you, everyone.